talk about as we move into our discussion. A lot of folks become very uncomfortable with the use of the word Negro. And a lot of blacks don't know what to do with it. My dear friend here, Bob Darden, probably is much better a historian or has watched these trends over the years change from some of the unmentionable names to which people of enslaved African Americans enslaved Africans in America have been named, to being called colored, to being then Negroes, or then finally I think the word black came, and then Afro-American, right, Afro-American, and then we had African-American. I remember one scholar arguing that it should be American African. That was always her argument, because, but so there have been a lot of things. And it's interesting that the term black seems to be coming back again. But this word Negro certainly is an academic term. My colleague, Dr. U.C. Brown, argues for the use of this because it denotes a certain period of time in which this literature was originated or was put into place. For instance, I always find it interesting that when you think about the NAACP, which I will say something about this evening, the title of the hymn festival this evening is Lift Every Voice and Sing. Well, it was never intended by James Weldon Johnson to be the Negro national anthem. And actually it became got named the Negro national anthem when years later, after Weldon Johnson had written the poem and moved to New York and became the executive secretary for the NAACP, which is the National Association of Colored People, that they would call it the Negro national anthem. Well, I think you're getting the picture, right? So what's the name? What's in a name? What's in a label? So you see all of these various names that are going, and historically when that would have been was probably about 1925, 1930, sometimes in that when that was kind of adopted and adapted. But trust me, there was no vote, there was no profound meeting of all black people in America, and we all checked off, and everybody historically said this is the song. It was kind of dubbed that by the NAACP. And you'll see tonight, or if you've ever sung it, that it has nothing whatsoever to do with black people as a specific group, or it has nothing to do with the NAACP. But the term Negro is one that, in fact, has a lot of distinction today, even as we speak. There is a group, a historic group meeting in New Orleans. They are called NAM, N-A-N-M, the National Association of Negro Musicians. I know what's getting ready to come up over the next 2 years as they approach the 100th anniversary of that group. It's going to be, why are we still calling ourselves Negroes, in the 21st century? Because that's not attractive to the young people that we're trying to attract. But others are saying, but that's what we were historic. So well, maybe it needs to become the black music, something also known as. And so it'll be interesting. They have that same discussion every 10 years. We'll see what happens as they approach the 100th anniversary of it. So I just wanted to kind of disarm your discomfort with that, because it's a term that even people of African ancestry struggle with today. And so all of a sudden you see this title, Negro, and somebody says, I think that's rude, or I think they shouldn't be called that. Well, I am using it because the first few things that I will talk to you about are collections that have been named in many cases, or composers who have called them the Negro. As Langston Hughes' wonderful poem, the Negro, what is it, the Negro speaks of, Howard Thurman, the Negro spiritual speaks of life and death, something, so that these names have been used to represent a particular body of music by a particular people at a particular time. Now, what is very interesting to note that this year is the 150th anniversary of the first collection of this music ever in the United States, called Slave Songs of the United States, which was compiled in 1867 by 3 northern white abolitionists. Lucy McKim Garrison, who was really the only musician of the group, Charles William Allen, and William Pickard. So these 3, and the story about how they went around through different regions and collected these slave songs was really quite interesting. There's a little clip, it's called, I think, The History Detectives, that PBS has, where somebody's found a copy of this, and they go in and they're the detectives, and they go in and try to find out. For me, the most interesting part of that were the 3 people who were the compilers and collectors. And you want to know, well, wait a minute, how did these northern abolitionists get access to these slaves? And that story is really quite interesting. But that collection is divided into about 4 sections. I think with about 130, 140 some slave songs. But now notice the title now is Slave Songs. And that's the first thing I put. So that in 1867, exactly 150 years ago, these melodies were referred to as slave songs. Not to be confused with spiritual as we think of it today as being a composition that is sacred. Because certainly all slave songs were not sacred. Yeah. And if you look, and of course you can go online and look at the table of contents and see the various titles. Many of them deal with personal names, experience. They're just kind of, what some of them call their cabin plantation melodies. You've seen some that come along, call them Jubilee songs, but they're all in this same collection called Slave Songs of the United States. So when we talk and hear the word spiritual, it's a word sometimes that gets thrown around. Now, there was William Fuller Jackson, some of you know that, that talked about black spirituals and white spirituals. What's a white spiritual? Well, white people don't have spirituals, they're folk songs. Well, you see how we split hairs and still, have nothing on our head. It's very interesting because to think of a spiritual today, what immediately comes to the mind of a person is a sacred song. I had the privilege of having a conversation with the late William L. Dawson. If you ever met Mr. Dawson before he passed away, that was an experience that wherever you met, it will be a story to tell, because there was just no one that met him that did not have a colorful story to tell, because he was quite a gentleman. But in a conversation that I had with him by phone, I can't really remember what it was that I was calling him about. But you never talked about what it was that you called to talk about until the end. And he might give you like 3 minutes after you talk to him. First of all, he says he doesn't do interviews on the phone. So you have to make sure that you don't make him think he's doing an interview and let him talk about anything he wants to and maybe try to get your subject in. And then he'll ask you in the last 3 minutes what you want and then give you some answer and hang up. But so in that 30 to 40 minutes that you talk with him, you'd better get everything, because that's how you had to interview him. But he asked me, you're up there at the University of Michigan, what is a spiritual? He rolled the R. And here I am trying to grab my little Harvard Dictionary of Musical Terms. You didn't have both of you, so I was holding the phone trying to grab this. He said, don't be looking up in no dictionary. You can see me in here, I'm just rattling on trying to come up with this long. He said, all those words, ain't said nothing. And I said, so he said, don't you know they're just folk songs? You ever heard the word folk songs? They're sacred folk songs. All that education, I don't know nothing. So I was very humbled by that. So I have always said to groups like this very quickly, the spiritual from the man himself, William Dawson, was that they are simply sacred folk songs. And the more you think about it, he's absolutely right. They're created by people that we don't really even know. I love, and if you have not had a chance, one of the most gorgeous pieces of poetry is a poem by James Weldon Johnson called "O Black and Unknown Bards." "O Black and Unknown Bards." It's online, B-A-R-D-S. And I have a lot of my students really to sit down and do a critique and a commentary, reflection on it, almost an exegesis, because he is such a wonderful use of language in that particular poem. But he talks about who are these people. We don't know who these people are that first heard a roll Jordan roller, who from the chains could reach up and see, swing low, sweet chariot. And he goes on to muse and reflect over these songs that have just come to us from somewhere, from somebody, from someplace. We don't know where they are, but they come to us. These unknown bards, these unknown stories. What made them write this? What could they have been going through? This is what he questions in that. Again, that poem is "Old Black and Unknown Bards" by James Weldon Johnson, incidentally. So when we think of the spiritual today, we are really thinking of, as Mr. Dawson says, a sacred folk song, anonymous as it may be. The Negro spiritual I have talked about, in that it is a kind of a specific name, time, place of a group of these sacred folk songs. But I want you to look at the next thing I have there, the concert or arranged spiritual, which begins to move more toward our topic. And the name that is most associated with that is Harry T. Burleigh, born in 1866 and died in 1949. Oh, the wonderful story of his encounter with Antonin Dvorak, and I won't get into too much of that time because that would be a whole lecture on its own. But because of that collaboration that he had during Mr. Dvorak's visit to the United States between 1892 and 1895, I think it was, the whole idea of this concert or this arranged spiritual. Burleigh was a very fine singer. He was a baritone, professional singer. But you can imagine, as a young black singer, he did not have the opportunities that most singers would have had in New York. And Mr. Dvorak did not understand why he wasn't singing somewhere in a church. And he tried to explain to him that was not possible in this country. And Mr. Dvorak insisted in going to speak to the rector, and it happens to be the St. George's Church, Episcopal Church down in the Wall Street district. If you know that area, that was the church. Of course, Mr. Dvorak arranged for the rector and the director of music to hear him sing, and they were very impressed. So he says, well, give him a job. And he said they knew that the only way that this would happen is that it had to go before the vestry. Well, the vestry did not, there was probably no chance, but it was a very popular practice of what they call screen auditions. So they would put the actor or the singer behind the screen and let them sing to see what they thought of the ability, as opposed to making judgments of, oh, he's too tall, he's too short, she's black, she's whatever, and so they would listen. So sure enough, this was kind of the way they planned this audition. And of course, when Mr. Burleigh got through singing, the vestry was just overwhelmed. When he stepped out and they discovered he was white, they were like, what is this? Why would you do this and all? So the chair of the vestry said, well, let's have a vote. So it became a very tense moment. They went all around the vestry. The vestry members slowly but surely voted, no, and began to tell their reason why they no, but they loved the voice, but no. And so the chair continued to write down the votes and the explanations of each of these people. And at the end of this, he continued to write. So some of the members of the vestry said, well, we haven't heard from you. What do you think? He says, well, I've been sitting here and I've been keeping a record of your vote and also making a note of your annual giving. I've added all of that up, and I'm willing to double that. And he says, but I vote yes. The chair of the vestry was J.P. Morgan. And it's amazing that every time I tell that story, if I meet an old Episcopalian in the group, they'll say, boy, you didn't have to bust us out like that, but that's really what happened. There's another version of that that's not as kind as the one that you told. I said, yeah, I know that one too. But it was Harry T. Burleigh who really began to, what we should say, anthemize or began to make the spiritual a classical composition. So when he sang his German lieder or his French chanson or his Italian arias or whatever, he took the melody, these Negro melodies, with piano accompaniment and made them into concert or arranged spirituals. Probably the most famous of all of his, many of you will know, his music. So if there was ever a pioneer or father of the concert or arranged spiritual, it certainly was Harry T. Burleigh, and many followed thereafter. I have also listed on here some other books, and some of these you may not know, but there are some wonderful books on your shelf if this is really something that you're interested in. James Weldon and J. Rosamond Johnson actually together did two set of books, the books of American Negro spirituals. I think that date is really more like 1925, 1926. They did book one, and then the very next year they published some others. So they're now combined as the books. I think it's called the Books of American Negro Spirituals, in that they were two volumes that were published together. Still available. Another wonderful collection by R. Nathan Adet, Religious Folk Songs of the Negro as Sung at Hampton Institute. Published in 1927, where Det refers to all of the spirituals in there as hymns. Hymns of hope, hymns of so-and-so in the category. Because in Det's mind, for the students, he was creating this hymn book of spirituals. Wow. In that, in the broadest sense, hymns are really songs sung by the congregation, and anthems are specifically sung by the choir, regardless to the genre of music. Because now, oh no, we don't sing anthems. Well, do the people sing along with it? No, it's for the choir woman, that's an anthem. But hymns. So in that the congregation sings it. These student body, as they sang in that wonderful chapel with no, well at that time, no instruments, but to hear the beautiful singing of the Hampton student body at that time. Then another wonderful collection by John W. Work. I should have put John W. Work the third, who in 1940 published another collection, American Negro Songs, 230 folk songs and spirituals, religious, and secular. So you see how that title gets spread out and what he calls it. So we're still using the word Negro, but spiritual. Now he's talking about sacred and secular. So we're really beginning to see a real split in the word spiritual to mean exclusively that of sacred, a sacred folk song. Then comes along, of course, Dawson, Hall Johnson, Undine Smith Moore, Jester Harrison, and to fast forward to Moses Hogan and many of the other composers that you know that are composing today. All of them are kind of following these trailblazers who started composing these spirituals and arranging these spirituals. Now, having said that, I want to look at the next term on here called in the style of a spiritual. Every now and then, I guess like most musicians, we have our fascination with different composers, and so we will just start doing a lot of music, especially on anniversaries by composers. They may not have been our favorite composers, but it just seems like the right thing to do if you're celebrating one of their births. And I don't know if there is a birth of Hall Johnson, but Hall Johnson, there's a wonderful book written by Eugene Simpson about Hall Johnson. He was quite a composer. Do I have his? I don't have his dates. I know he died in 1969. But Hall Johnson was really to have been the conductor for Gershwin's first performance of Porgy and Bess, the chorus, and then there was some issues at that time. He was away conducting something else, and I don't think he had a lot of respect or a lot of desire to do that. But Eva Jesse actually ended up preparing that course for that for that first performance of Porgy and Bess. But Paul Johnson really dignified himself as an arranger of spirituals, and one of the things, spirituals, but he was really very interested in doing them as authentically as possible. He didn't like them if they were too anthemized. So you might look at Det and the kind of way Det arranged spirituals as he would consider too European. He wrote spirituals that he felt were a little more reserved, or that really reflected the kinds of singing of the enslaved Africans in America. Now, one of his most popular spirituals is called Ain't Got Time to Die. And every time I do that spiritual, I point out to the choir that it is Hall Johnson's piece. It is not arranged. It is Hall Johnson's composition. But he clearly writes in the style of the spiritual. You'll see momentarily other composers who have written, they're not historic spirituals, but they sound like one. They borrow the form, if you will, of the spiritual, and therefore they make pretty convincing arrangements. There's another one. Now, I just did one of his pieces because once I did that, it's just like I just wanted more of Hall Johnson, called When I Was Sinking Down. Actually, it's an American folk song, and his haunting arrangement of that is just, I still can't get it out of my mind. We did it 3 weeks ago. And so, but it's just been interesting, just kind of looking at his repertoire through and what it is that he was doing with that. But it was in the style of a spiritual. He's making it like a spiritual, not one of the historic spirituals that would have appeared in this slave songs of the United States in 1867. But certainly, and ready for something else to take away today? I know many of you love This Little Light of Mine, but guess what? In the style of a spiritual, written by two white folks from Chicago in 1920, in the style of a spiritual. Oh, no, my grandmother sang. That's great, which meant your grandmother must have been alive after 1920 because it didn't exist until that time. It was written for children. And the scriptural references were hiding, not hiding your light under a bushel and all these kinds of things. And it was written for children in the style of the spiritual. So you mean it ain't a spiritual? Yes, it's a spiritual. But technically, it's in the style of the spiritual. And there's some folk. Thomas Dixon Lowes was the person who provided the music, and I think Avis Christensen, I think, was the person who wrote the lyrics for that. But it was a collaborative effort. At Moody, I don't need that. You've been around all that stuff. No, it was not an hour in the sense of that. It was in the style of the spiritual. So This Little Light of Mine just happens to be another example of this written in the style of spiritual. In a moment, you're going to see what we call gospelized spirituals. This is taking a spiritual as it was in its original thing and kind of putting gospel music to it, or gospelizing it. Particularly, that was what Thomas Dorsey did. I was very proud of that. And Mahalia Jackson and so many of the early pioneers, as Bob knows better than I do, who many of their early recordings were spirituals that were gospelized. I've used that word. I think the word now is pretty much understood as gospelized spiritual. So that when you hear it, you're listening. I'm thinking of Rosetta Thorpe. Two of her biggest hits and arrangements were spirituals. Up Above My Head, yeah. But she's got the guitar and everything's going, but she's gospelizing the spiritual. And of course that happens much today as well. So finally we come down to one of my favorite topics before we start singing, and that is call and response. And that for me is something that I pray and wish, and even at my own church, I am trying to build in places where this tradition will be maintained. And we have found the right place for it, and it's during our baptisms. As Baptists, we all sing much about baptism. We Baptists, you know, I don't think we like water, you know. Especially not even emergent. Once we're done, you know, we're done, you know, but that's it. You know, we don't sing about, and wading in the water doesn't have anything to do with baptism. It's, you know, it's really talking about, you know, a place to get in the water to make sure that, you know, your scent, you know, would be knocked off so the dogs wouldn't come up with it. So wade in the water, God's in trouble in the water. You know, there's a whole lot going on in that whole song. You know, but, you know, wade in the water to get baptized was not quite the exegesis that, you know, slaves had in mind. You know, it wasn't well, you know, is this going to be a Christological, you know, experience of a Trinitarian baptism, or this will be oneness? No, that was not the case. On the run. So other than take me to the water and some things, you stop and think, how many hymns do Baptists know about baptism? It's embarrassing. Yeah. And you ask them, and then they swell up like blowfish. You look through the hymns. So this has been our challenge. And so we finally, I said, well, since we only celebrate 2 ordinances, Baptists, you know, communion, Lord's Supper, Eucharist, and baptism, we ought to act like we like it, you know, since we only got 2. If we were Catholic, we'd have 7, you know. So, you know, we got 2. We got 1 we have to deal with every Sunday. The folks, you know, get impatient about it. Oh, that means we're going to be late getting the brunch. You know, and because baptism is a tackle. It's always late on first Sunday. Lord, what if Jesus had been too busy or rushing to Calvary? Where would we be? But then many times I look at what we do at the Lord's table, and I can understand why it's a problem, because we literally put Jesus back in the tomb. And what we sing and how we do it, who would want to go near it? You walk in, they got this thing across up here, all the folk in black, you know, white with some gloves on, and they all walking around. It's one of those kids, they take the kids to the nursery. You know, it's worse than a horror show. You know, what are they doing under that coat? You know, they mumbling these old songs. And so we don't understand the celebration in the resurrection of the dead. And so we have had to think about that even with regard to baptism. And baptism is supposed to be, and of course you don't use the word Christian initiation anymore, because, you know, ladies don't like anything but fraternal initiation. They don't even like that anymore. But if we are to enter into the life of faith through baptism, through Christ's death, that we are born into new life, then here's a wonderful opportunity. As the early church did, they didn't have pianos and organs where they baptized folks, so they had to sing a cappella. And these were moments, and they were accompanied with singing. That baptism was like a non-stop singing kind of thing, in addition to the role of baptism. So that's a place where we have found in our church now, where we're going to do it. And we're going to do it on Sunday mornings, as part of that, on 4th Sundays, as a part of our service, so that people witness it, as opposed to, oh Lord, it's going to be a tackle. Well, no, then we should either cut out baptism or we should really observe it. You know, if communion is going to be too much of a problem, and some folks say, yeah, that's a good idea. We were thinking, man, maybe we would just do it, you know, for Christmas and Easter, because this communion thing is really getting wrong. It's amazing the kinds of thinking that's going across contemporary churches. You ask people, I go to the so-and-so church, do you take communion? No, we don't believe that you have to do that. Well, I'm not going to bother the theology, but, you know, that's what people are all across the map on that. But where do you use this music? Where is it preserved? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's easy to go to a concert and listen to these concert and these arranged versions of spirituals that most choirs really struggle to master. Especially some of the Hogan and some of these spirituals that are coming now that require SS, AA, TT, BB with an obligato trio and then a solo over there. And one lady, I'll never forget, I was doing a reading session and I said, well, now let's turn to page 10, where the basses and baritones start in here, and then the second tenors come in, and first tenors layer with that, and then there's second altos and first, and then it kind of builds. The lady looked at the piece and she kept looking. She said, baby, I ain't got that many people in my choir with me singing. So she said, that's nice, let me hear how I sing. ain't nothing we're going to do with this. And she was right. She was right. She just cared. I saw her. She was sitting down front. She was and when she put it down, she just said, they ain't got that many people. Not what? With me singing. And this is true, that many of these arrangements are meant for college, very advanced high school choirs or professional choirs. The arrangements are for performance, for concerts. And if you're brave enough and bold enough to do it, just like some Brahms motet, it requires rehearsing, a lot of rehearsing, section, getting right. You just don't sing it and call it. Those notes, they want it. And trust me, these young composers want what they've written. Mm-hmm. They don't want a variation on it. Well, we're going to attempt to sing. Lord, y'all pray for us. They don't say, don't pray. Don't just move on to the next number. Paul Johnson was notorious for walking out performances in New York. Bad performances of his music. They start singing something wrong. He just get up, go down the aisle so everybody can see him leave. Oh, he's mad. Because it just would not be good. And so many of these composers are writing now because they have Western training. They've looked at these models. They've listened to Dawson. They've listened to Chester Harrison, who were Moses Hogan's greatest models. And then those who are admirers of Moses, continue to write, and everybody. So it's like, how hard can you make the piece? Trust me, it's not for worship. There's a lot of choral music, Western music. We just don't sing in church because it's too heavy for what the liturgy is attempting to do in worship. So that's why I said the Negro spiritual in worship or in concert performance. So what I have given you in this collection are some things I want you to look at that would reflect possibilities of what composers are writing that have more worship quality in the composition. For instance, where would you do this? Not because, we've got 2 or 3 black people in our congregation and we want to do some spiritual. Trust me, they don't care. They probably want to hear some Palestrina, you'd be surprised. Or Brahms, but don't trick yourself, We've got these wonderful Latinos. We're going to do some calypso music, with some shakers. You just failed. That wasn't the answer. That we call it tokenism, or I love Michael Hahn's word. He calls it ethnotourism. that we think we're exposing. But what does the music do to enhance, enliven, and support the liturgy? At what point, if you choose one of these pieces, at what point would you sing this piece in worship? Now, one of the things that I have had to reconsider is looking at spirituals, 4-part settings in hymnals. If you really want the congregation to sing a spiritual as a hymn selection, you probably don't want one that has a whole lot of chromaticism, or that has a lot of interludes that are leaping around, which the choir may be able to master, but the congregation cannot hear or master so well for itself. So let me just show you, let's look at I think the first one here on top is called Come By Here, and it is arranged by U.C. Brown. He arranged this, and notice it's written, it can be done a cappella, but it also has a note, piano or organ they improvise on the choral harmonies if desired, which usually it is desired, because if you have a choir that can't sing these parts, we may do one verse a cappella. But this is, let's sing with me. spiritual that very much can be used in worship, as those two places, as a gathering, or certainly even as a prayer response. And at this point, it's not a matter, it's a Negro spiritual or whatever. The text speaks for itself. What is it that the text is saying? I like to say, give it the text. Look at the text and see what it's saying. I want you to look down at 3 spoke spirituals. These are some that are very special to me because by Wendell Whalen, Leaning on the Lord, 420 Elders, and Fare Ye Well. Wendell Whalen was my teacher. This year marks the 30th anniversary of his death, which just seems almost unbelievable. But right before his death, he happened to be at Montreat. So he did these spirituals. He was there. He'd been asked to do a session on spirituals. And so he arranged these. Well, actually, he taught these, quite frankly, a cappella. Right off the top of his head, he wanted them to begin to just create them. And so it was actually David Morrow, his successor at Morehouse College, who actually put these down into the notes that he pretty much taught. But I want you to notice, again, the simplicity of this. How did you feel when you come out the wilderness? Well, I have used this on a lot of Palm Sundays because thinking of Jesus coming out of the wilderness and that triumphant ride, this spiritual speaks to that. It also speaks to just victory over hard times at any time of the year. So, and I'm leaning on the Lord becomes a testimony of such. But I want you to look at this. You have a leader and you have people who respond to it, which let me quickly show you on the paper this call and response, which I love to share with you. There are at least 4 types of call and response. Here is one. Tell me, how did you feel when you? The leader just says that. And the folks run through this computer in their mind and they fill in the blank. Or it falls under that line of fragment and completion. So as you see, I put the 2 like guide my feet, which you'll see in those, or I woke up this morning with my mind, and then the fragment is that, and then the completion is stayed on Jesus. So it finishes the line. So here is one of these spirituals, call and response, that is fragment and completion. Here we go. I'll do this and you follow. Tell me, how did you feel when you I like to think in worship of, or if this was going to be used and this was a passage of Scripture, read the Scripture, then sing in spiritual, so that it picks up on what you've done. But you say, well, who the 24 elders? What's 24 people sitting there? What's about 24 divided by? What's that? Well, maybe, yeah. So you see that they're taking, it's being lifted right out of Scripture. So you can't get any more biblically based than this. But I'll just quickly go through this with you, which is also another one of these fragment and completion type of spirituals. That's the essence of what this is saying. While I don't see you anymore, sing on, pray on, live the life, sing God's word. But this really comes probably from the West African tradition of where mothers were being separated from daughters, fathers from sons, family members torn asunder, put on different ships to go to different parts of the world because you're being pretty much handled like cargo. So if it looks like the two of you may be friends, I better send you over here. It's kind of like what teachers do in school when they figure out who the troublemakers are. Separate those two right there. So there might be too much of a bond between those sisters right there. So I better send that sister over there. So imagine the heartstrings that are being torn, the hearts that are bursting open with this kind of separation. And so they're now in chains, they're being taken away to different places to live enslaved lives. And the spiritual comes, fare you well, if I never, ever see you anymore, I'll meet you on the other shore. The shore meaning that when we get to this new world, wherever we get, I'll meet you on that new shore. Also has eschatological meaning, that while we may not see each other here, I'll meet you on that beautiful shore, where the wicked shall cease from troubling and the weary shall be at rest, and you know all the wonderful images of heaven. So at Morehouse's commencement, after the young men have received their degrees and turned their tassels, and they look around at each other and know that they are these brothers that they have been in community with and have become family for some 4, 5, 6 years. They're finally getting ready to say goodbye. And many of them will never see each other again. This past summer, not only was that the case of students, our interim president, 55 years old, one evening had an aneurysm, gone. 55 years old. 2 young men, both I think from the Chicago area, who were students, unusual deaths. So students and friends that they just saw, they were planning to see in the fall, are no more. So even at our commencements, you think about your own graduations. You haven't seen someone since their high school graduation. or your college graduation. But then all of a sudden you say, well, if I don't see you anymore, I'll see you somewhere else. So as they sing this, as faculty members, we say we watch these young boys grow into young men, because it really begins to make them think about the finality of life. So the leader says, amen. his tune. Every now and then you see hear a little fragment that comes from something else. But this is certainly one of those examples of being written in the style of a spiritual that really pretty much becomes a choir number in worship, and certainly for use around Christmas time. Now, I want you to look at Guide My Feet. I type of spiritual that I talked about earlier, and that was the gospelized spiritual. This guide my feet again follows in that kind of fragment and completion. Guide my feet while I run this race, and then guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race, 'cause I don't want to run this race in there. So now you got that almost in the traditional spiritual, but now listen to this. Certainly very, very likely to be sung in worship services. That can be done during Lent. It can certainly be done on any number of occasions where you are talking about guidance. I just can't think of how many different occasions it could be used on. But the text speaks for itself, not the genre. I want to show you in the couple of seconds that I have left these other two pieces just to show you examples of spirituals that are accessible for choirs and that more likely are going to be appropriate for worship in that they don't, the music doesn't get in the way of the text or call more attention to it. The arrangements are so complex that at the end of the piece you feel like saying bravo, bravo, because the choir actually got through all 1,800 notes. That this really had a message that supported the liturgy. Let's try this one. Bond and Gilead. Ready? I like to think of it as that people are more likely to hear the message than the music. The music is just the tray on which the text is served. But in the case of some pieces that I know, Moses Soto was one of my dear friends. I love him dearly, but I told him, I said, Moses, most folks don't know who Elijah was and what they were rocking about. Elijah, and they don't know Elijah, don't know anything about the rock. What was Elijah? What was he dying? It's just a good story. So people just get that. Ezekiel saw a wheel, Dawson. You don't know about what was the wheel up in the middle of the air, just a wheel. You know, you don't know if it's something off of the truck that got loose on the interstate. You know, so the story has no real meaning. And that the spiritual, in the case of this bomb in Gilead, I love Howard Thurman's analysis of this. He says, the Negro spiritual goes to Jeremiah 8:22, and at the end where the question is raised, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician here? The question is really kind of rhetorical. The Negro spiritual takes that question mark and snatches it into an exclamation point and says, there is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin sick soul. So the point of using the music to support the liturgy is much more important than the tokenism or just do, like some folks say, well, let's just do some tazek. We need to do some tazek. Why? Well, because it's the Bastille Sunday, you know, so we should do some tazek, you know, and so, you know, we're having French pastries, for, you know, and so people will just make up reasons. And so you've got this piece of music that's sticking out like a sore thumb that has no place. But trust me, the last pieces in here, I won't go through them, but these are some wonderful four-part settings by that Master Joseph Joubert, who has arranged some spirituals that you don't always find. I always tell folks, let's look at the spirituals that are not in the top 15 that you know. In the case of this, Give Me Your Hand, which is a wonderful spiritual of fellowship. don't really require quite the concert spirituals, the SSA, SSAA, TTTTBBBB, but you can really sing some just really nice four-part spirituals, and they don't have to be always the same ones that you know, and there's so many. So I hope this is helpful to you, and that you have gotten something out of this. This music is yours forever and always, and as you're going out, if you know someone that did not make this session, please feel free to take a packet to them and share with them if you know someone that may enjoy it. I know we're over time, but if you have some questions, I don't mind taking them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll sound the sound. Oh yeah, it was arranged in the style of spiritual. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's easy. You know, it would definitely fit in the category of a spiritual. But there again, you know, written in the style of a spiritual. Yeah, absolutely.
You talk about the slave songs and then folk music, you know. How came to be the words? How do you get that together? The music with tunes that you would use earrings, and then it become a song that you can sing.
Well, you know, it's interesting, and that's why I mentioned that poem. It's really quite what should I say? It's a oratorical masterpiece that James Weldon Johnson. He asked the questions: how did these people hear? What circumstances? Who were they? Where were they? We don't really know. I mean, these songs have been handed down to us by oral transmission. And the thing about folk music, that's that magic word, folk music, is this is the music that the people make up, out of whatever struggles, out of whatever oppression, out of whatever systematic racism or classism or sexism or whatever that they have endured. And they sing, they pick these melodies, in many cases, out of the sky, or they hum them, they make up tunes. Particular, Bob's incredible work about the civil rights movement. They had a song in mind, or words in mind. They snatched a tune, borrowed tunes sometimes, you know, or made up tunes kind of in the style of it to help support them. There was something I saw on TV recently where there was some kind of protest, and the folk had started some little song that basically chanted the words that they were saying. Now, if you heard that somewhere else, you would wonder where that came from, but it actually came out of this group of people who were frustrated and protesting that time, and they were repeating and chanting this over again, until somehow it began to carve its way into a song. There was a little melody that started springing up, and it made it a little easier. The melody made those words carry a little easier. And we just don't know. We don't know where. We don't know when, in the case of some of this.
The thing is that I'm from Mexico, and we never have this music ever. We don't know.
Yeah, but out of the Mexican tradition, that folk music, absolutely. Yes. It may never be written down.
Yeah.
Oh, but you go to any informal situation, and boy, I can imagine those melodies would blow your mind.
What I don't understand is, and probably everybody knows here, but I was just talking to somebody else yesterday, and he was telling me about this song, Negro Spiritual, and he said something about crossing the Jordan. It meant in the youth of somewhere that they had to cross to be free, and like that. So what I imagine is that if you, let's say that a black person being a slave heard this song from his grandfather or whatever, they were passing the tune around, and somebody's come up with the words as they want to cross that, or maybe somebody else, we don't know, just come up with the words. But what I'm trying to say is that if the people who was in pain make the words of the Negro Spiritual, or just somebody else that, hey, I have a poem.
No, these grow out of experiences. Many of them grow out of experiences. Now, that group that we said, right in the style of the spiritual, they may just come up with something like that. But many of these, particularly in that early collection that I talked about from 1867, this is what they just heard the people singing. These were being created out of their own pain and their own misery and their own oppression. Much as true as early gospel music. It was the good news for folk in bad times, and this encouraged them along. And they sang this kind of as survival music.
Give them strength.
To give them strength, perseverance. This became their way of coping. I like to think of that whole idea of survival music. This is what we do to survive. We just have to sing until times get better. Okay, let someone else. I think.
Yes, I am interested in presenting some spirituals in a voice recital, and then I'm also a teacher of voice. And 2 years ago, I had a young man come to me, age 21, and he was a baritone bass, not quite fully a bass, but had those wonderful low notes. And I just could hear him singing the spirituals. And I did quite a bit of research online, looking at books and compilations, but I never attempted it because because I want to go about in the right way. And what would you recommend in terms of how to do the music correctly in a recital or concert format for solo voice?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of it, I have to admit, comes through what we call apprenticeship, the right way to do it. I have heard, you look at the indications on the music. One of the big things that people constantly struggle over with dialect. And one of the things that I said, don't let dialect be the make or break as to whether or not you will sing or do this music. James Weldon Johnson probably wrote one of the most important treatises on dialect, actually, that appears in the preface of the books of American spirituals. But going back to Burley, some of those very early spirituals, there is Harry T. Burley spirituals are really great places to begin.
Can you spell that for me?
Yeah. Harry T. Burley. It's on the back.
It is on the back.
Yeah.
It's on here.
Right. Yeah.
Got
Harry
it.
T.
Okay.
Burley. Yeah. 1866. Yeah. Burley. A lot of his spirituals. Some of those early spirituals. Nowadays, some of the spirituals that are being written are where Paul Johnson has some spirituals. I'd like to put you in touch, if you'll let me see, with some master folks of that. For instance, Dr. U.Z. Brown is a wonderful, wonderful person. And to sit in some voice master classes and just see how people work with them and how they work through those things. But don't be afraid to just teach the notes. It's like, let's face it, we will never sing German Lieder to the liking of Germans.
Right.
Because we're American, we're just never going to do it right. And my Lord, the French chanson, you just don't have the sweeping and whatever. And then every teacher has his or her own interpretation. But I think for young students to learn to master the notes and sing that music, that's a place to begin. Those 24 Italian art songs, boy, you want to see a fight, go to a teacher's, to see how people will dissect what you do with those 24 Italian arts. Carl Romeo Ben, you'll think it was some Italian cantata that was written by, some great composer, because everyone's going to have a different approach to it, and how you do that. I've seen people, oh, Lord, we want to start on Bach. Oh, no, that's not right. You should do that. And so, there are different ways. Start with some of the simple things that they can sing and understand. One of the problems, particularly with young singers, is being able to really understand the experience out of which these were written. I heard something just recently. You have to watch what you teach children's choirs. Children's choirs don't need to be singing about the one up yonder. They just got here. Sooner or later.